Hello, listeners. Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator, bringing you the podcast series, How Did I Get Here? A series of interviews designed for people just starting out in their careers, people in transition, or possibly feeling stuck, and giving them access to the stories of people who have been there, done that, so that they might be inspired with some new ideas, or maybe just comforted knowing they are not alone, that everybody starts somewhere and everybody goes through times of transition and times when they feel stuck. Today, I'm excited to be interviewing Jamie Dandar McKinney. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you, Kathy.
And Jamie is the president of Jamie Empowers, which we'll get to learn more about that shortly. But listeners, as you know, I always like to start with the icebreaker questions because we want to get to know you on a more personal level and then get into the professional stuff. So Jamie, tell us where you grew up, what part of the country, how many siblings, where you are in the birth order, and how you think that shaped you as an adult.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in tropical Toledo, Ohio.
Tropical, love that.
As the good old Midwest. I am the oldest of three daughters.
And what's the age difference?
18 months and then 3 months after that. So 4.5 years total span. So yes, my parents had three teenage daughters for also a period of about 5 years if you do the math. So
wow, that's very close. That's kind of like me and my sisters. There's three of us in exactly 3 years because my mom had my sisters on the same day, 3 years apart.
Interesting.
So isn't that crazy? Yeah, but you think about 3 kids, 3 years, 3 kids, 4 years. That's a lot. A lot of diapers in the beginning and then a lot of those teenage issues.
Yeah, a few.
Okay, so you're oldest, and would you say you're the stereotypical kind of oldest personality?
Yes, if you read any of the studies on birth order, the first time I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, they bugged our house. Like this is written about us. So yes, we are very stereotypically those three. Although as we've gotten older, we kind of it's mellowed out a little bit. It's not as blatant as oldest, middle, youngest. We each have similar qualities now, but certainly when we were growing up, all the stereotypes were true in our household.
I totally agree with that. I see that too. As we're older, it doesn't seem to play out as much, but certainly in those especially when you probably were babysitting and the oldest one in charge because you were in charge, and yeah, that's how I felt with my older sister too. She was in charge. So, what kind of activities did you do for fun? Were it music, sports, dance?
Dance was a big one. We played outside a lot. Anything having to do with obstacle courses and bike ramps and kick the can. And our neighborhood was full of boys, and so we were always outside. Until we got called in. Dandar girls, time to come home. Outside as much and as often as we could be, year round even.
Wow, super active, and then probably one of the few girls then in the neighborhood, it sounds like. So
yes, next door to us there were 3 boys, and they were all about the same age as us. Our moms had been best friends in high school, and so that was fun because we got to grow up with each other, kind of like having siblings but under different roofs. And similar stories with the rest of the neighborhood. It was a lot of boys, a couple other girls, but the majority were boys.
Okay, cool. So are you an introvert or an extrovert?
So I laugh because, having been home now for a year, right? I mean, the pandemic has been in effect for a year. I said to my husband the other day that I think I've turned introvert, and he laughed quite uproariously and said, no, you have not. So definitely an extrovert. Starting your own business during a pandemic is a pretty isolating journey in a lot of ways. I mean, I spent a lot of time in my office, and I'm thankful for that time. I got a lot done, but I still really do crave the human interaction and being able to see full body language and reaction and just feel that energy that you can get a little sense of it in a virtual environment, but not the same as in person. So
yeah,
definitely extrovert.
Okay, so we'll make a check mark there, and then on the fun meter scale of 1 to 5, one being couch potato and 5 being life of the party. Where do you put yourself?
Ooh, good question. I would say a 3.5. I definitely like to observe and listen before I speak, kind of gauge my audience, no matter where or who it is. And then, happy to carry a conversation, ask questions, and participate.
So it sounds like it depends on the situation. You kind of assess things and then decide on how you're gonna show up and what needs to be brought to the party or to the couch.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
So on the risk meter, same scale, 1 to 5, 1 being low and 5 being high. Where do you put yourself in terms of taking a risk?
I'd say a little bit above that 3.5 mark, more closer to 4. If there's danger present, that's not so much my thing. But if it's speaking in terms of professional, growing a business, you have to take risks. And I like the term fail forward or fail fast, and navigating those risks, because unless you step out of your comfort zone and you take a risk, things are just going to plod along in the same way, and it's hard to achieve growth like that. So I'm good with stepping out of my comfort zone. Confidence is the overarching message that I teach and preach, and so I have to walk my own walk.
Yeah. Well, and you already talked about that. You started a business during a pandemic, so that would be an indicator of your risk there too. So, all right. Well, I love asking those questions about how you grew up, birth order, and all that, and then also this fun and risk meter, because then we see how that plays out when we hear your story. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it means to be the president of Jamie Empowers, and then we'll get into the how did I get here?
How did I get here? All right, excellent. So the Jamie Empowers mission is to empower professional women to ditch doubts, speak up, and achieve the careers they deserve and desire. So any given day is full of still virtual workshops, although we've got some in-person talks booked for later this year, so that's exciting. With groups ranging in size, anywhere between 20 and 2,000, in a virtual environment. You can go pretty big, pretty fast. And then also one-on-one leadership coaching to help women repair the broken rung of the corporate ladder and help move up within their companies and achieve the promotions and the new titles that they want, and break through some of the invisible barriers that have historically held women back.
Wow. Well, I think you need to adjust your risk score there, because I think your whole business is about risk and helping women kind of adjust their risk. So it seems like there's a little bit more on the scale there than maybe what you let on. But anyway, we'll find out more about that as we go through. So great.
Well, you bring up a good point, though, because what is one person's normal is to be different on somebody else's risk scale, and maybe part of that is how do we bridge that gap. If somebody does want to step more out of their comfort zone or take on that risk, it's a very doable process. It just, there is some strategy to it. So
yeah
that's a good point.
And when you think about the introvert extrovert too, right, in terms of sometimes how people think out loud are more extroverted and introverts are more processing, and then you need time. So yeah, that does affect risk as well as the voice in the room, and how do you bring up things when you don't have it baked out yet and you're not really comfortable. So okay, well, cool. Well, I'm curious to learn more about that as we get through your story. So tell us though, let's go back to say junior high school. Is this what you always wanted to be when you grew up?
No, I originally we played a lot of game show host type of scenarios when I was younger, and I still think that would be super fun to be a game show host. And some of my workshops do have elements of gaming and definitely audience interaction, so I get to fulfill that bucket a little bit. I knew I wanted to go into business. The way my mom's side of the family came over to America was with a wine and cheese and meat specialty store. And as a kid, 8 years old, we'd play in the store, but I would write my own inventory reports, which, just saying out loud, sounds incredibly boring. but that was fun for me as a kid, and I always knew, business, MBA, exactly what. I wasn't sure, but went along that path, and I'm very blessed to have had a lot of different experience in business. I mean, everything from Fortune 100 down to startup, and variety of jobs and roles in between, all the way up to chief strategy officer. So as all of these experiences were building, I eventually just started listening more, because I was getting requests to come speak to women's groups. And throughout my career, I had spoken publicly, mostly like trainings or something on behalf of the company. And then over time, I was being asked to come and just tell my story. Nothing having to do with the company. How did you get through your heavily male-dominated industry career, Jamie? What were some of the lessons that you learned? What can we do too? And after giving those talks, each time a handful of women would come up to me and say, "Hey, this was great. I want to learn more. How do I buy your book?" And my book, Kathy, was not on my radar at all. That was not a bucket list item for me. But after so many people had asked, I thought, maybe, maybe I should listen to this. And so that was what spawned the book. And then I was dabbling. I was just writing a little bit here and there. And then I was actually in Midland, Texas for work. I was working in the oil and gas industry at the time. And a publisher called me, and I answered my phone. I remember I was riding shotgun in the pickup truck, and one of my sales guys was driving. And I thought she introduced herself, and I thought somebody was playing a trick on me, like punking me, like, "Sure, you're a publisher, and sure, you had heard about the concept for my book and want to make this happen." But as it turned out, she was not joking. And fast forward, and the book "Speak Up, Sister: The Professional Woman's Guide to Confidence and Success" is published, and the material that's in that book was also a big prompt for the material that I now present in workshops and that I teach in the professional development coaching program.
Wow. Well, that's a great overview. Thank you for giving us that synopsis of it. And wow, so you're driving probably in the middle of nowhere, I'm guessing, in Texas, when you get this
Yes.
call out of the
Yeah.
blue, big surprise. But yeah, you got to get all that tingly feeling of, oh, well, now maybe this is real and maybe this is cool. And what would it look like? I can't even imagine. That would be super fun.
Yeah, it was fun. And I think no coincidence that I had service at the time when she called, because often middle of like you don't,
Yeah.
There's no phone service. So
Yeah. Yeah.
serendipity there for sure.
Well, give us some insight into some of those business roles that you were in. And I mean, did you have your voice initially? I mean, like, so you get it sounds like you got your bachelor's and your master's. Then did you start in sales right away, or kind of what was some of those first jobs?
So straight out of college, I started working in the automotive industry. So I had business undergrad degree, and automotive wasn't necessarily something that I was shooting for, but I was interested in a sales role. And this particular company said, "Hey, we've got company car, phone, computer, all this really cool stuff, especially coming out of college. We have ongoing training for you," which was highly appealing to me. Like, now I'm going to get paid to continue to go to professional school, essentially. And we're going to train you to be in a sales territory. All of that sounded wildly appealing to me. The industry was interesting and it was fascinating. The part, though, that was particularly integral to what I do now is that I was the third female to join a team of 400. And I was the youngest by on average 20 years, first job out of college, so no real business experience, and I hadn't grown up in the industry. So I stuck out like a sore thumb, and these guys were not used to having women in the industry, especially not one who was as young as I was and who had a college degree. Many of them did not, and so when they realized that I was being groomed to move up and could someday, maybe sooner than later, be their boss, you can imagine some of the resistance and shenanigans that occurred for me in that environment.
Wow, what a difficult place to be. I mean, you're highly recruited, and again, you're all excited, that blind enthusiasm, right, coming into your first job. But then you get in there, and the resistance that you face, because you don't look and act and talk and know stuff like everybody else does. And wow, yeah,
Correct. But it also, I was naive. I mean, I just thought, well, okay, this is how the business world is, and I'm here to have an impact and make a difference and get promotions. And so that's when I figured out, it was a few years into it, because like there were things that were working, and I would reflect on that sometimes, like, how is this working? Because I'm still one of very few females. I'm still the youngest one. I'd gained a little bit of industry experience, of course, but some of them had been in the industry longer than I had been alive, and I was never going to be able to compete with that. But the presence that I had in meetings and the confidence that I carried myself with, even when I didn't know as much as they did, that continued to help me establish my credibility and get my work done and get my job done. And that was a huge piece of it. So much so that I started studying it and researching it, because I thought, all right, well, if this is working, I want to make sure to keep this up, and learn more about it to ensure that I kept it as my secret sauce, right? That I could continue to leverage it, and it was very helpful. And now that's what I teach.
yeah. Well, I'm really impressed with and curious about this, how you tackled I shouldn't say tackled, you really dove into what was working. I mean, they all, a big part of, leadership is about being self-aware and understanding your strengths and kind of your blind spots, et cetera, et cetera. But I
Mhm.
remember when I was coming up through the corporate world, so much of our focus was on, oh, well, what's your weakness? You need to focus on these weaknesses. And we didn't focus on the strengths. It wasn't until later that, Strengths Finder came out and there was this whole shift on,
Yep.
no, focus on your strengths and, you know, figure out, we know what your weaknesses are, but you don't have to stay in that space. But you kind of figured that out on your own. I mean, that's really impressive.
I mean, I sort of had to. I think, like, and it's, curiosity is a characteristic that I've had my whole life. I often hear the question or the statement, "Gosh, Jamie, nobody's ever asked me that," and I love when I hear that. That's kind of like a little, I do a little victory dance, because now they're learning something, or seeing something in a different way. And I remember sitting in a meeting, and myself and 8 gentlemen, and again I was like, all right, I am thinking differently than they are. Like, there's got to be a reason here. There's got to be something behind this. It can't just be because they're men and I'm a woman or whatever. And that's when I started, like I said, researching some of it and looking into the neuroscience and the differences in how we think. And I didn't think I had much opportunity to change their way of thinking. That the difference was something that I wanted to learn how to navigate with our differences rather than against them. What can I learn from this? I heard a story recently, and this is all about mindset and how you're framing it. That a woman who's a friend of mine, she was it was like a personality assessment course. This is when we could meet in person, and there were 4 variables on which everybody was being measured. And so when they announced where everybody measured, you went to a certain place in the room to show what quality or characteristic would fit with you. And she and another gentleman wound up in different places of the room each of the 4 times. And he came and talked to her afterwards, and you might think that he'd be like, gosh, we're so different, how are we ever going to work together? But instead he said to her, gosh, we were different on every single one of those variables. I bet we can learn a lot from each other.
Wow. Yeah.
So powerful, right? Because and that is the mentality with the curiosity side of things, that when someone isn't like you and they're not thinking the way you do, that's a huge opportunity to perhaps expose one of your own blind spots and to learn from each other. Because back to what you were saying, Kathy, about the strengths and the weaknesses, all of us have both of those things. And we can't be all things and be the strongest in everything, but somebody else is. So when we can communicate and bridge that gap, I mean, this is going to sound really cliche, but we really are stronger together. But it's that communication piece that needs to happen in order to establish, hey, we're on the same team. We are going to work together.
Yeah. I love that. I wish I'd have had that when I was younger. I wish I'd have known you, and then I could have, kind of broke through things. Because I remember I kind of had that mindset of how do I just be a better leader? How do I be a better manager? How to be a better employee? And so I was always in this mindset of not good enough. So that was that. And I remember that, holding me back at times. Other times I was, kind of that blind enthusiasm just going through, but then on occasion I would bounce into this not good enough thing, which really, could hit me hard at times and knock me back. And then once I started doing more personality tests though, that's what I really appreciated, that, all those tests, the big value out of that is just that we all think differently. And let's appreciate how we all think and what we bring to the table, not get frustrated that we don't think the same or at the same pace or in the same way, and that you don't get me, that kind of a thing. So that was really powerful. So I get what you're saying there. So, Jamie, at this point, so we've been talking about, personality tests and communication, and some of this stuff tends to go more toward the kind of the psychology, human behavior side. And yet you had such a strong background in business. Did you have your master's at this point, or were you getting your master's while you were working? Or give us a sense of what's going on education wise.
About 7 years into my automotive career, I was with the same company, and that's when I went back to school and got my MBA with the entrepreneurial focus. And then as far as the the human psychology side of things, I have a whole bookshelf full of official research and studying, and especially with writing the book as well, leaning on specific case studies. And it's interesting, Kathy, because for every study I found that proved one thing, you can find a study that proves the exact opposite. And per your earlier point, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind with whether it's a personality style or communication style, all of this is creating awareness that there's options and that there's different paths, and that none of us are stuck to this one path, as individuals or as a team. I love the phrase, water has a way. Water has a way. And if you think about water, like trickling down the side of a mountain or even down the street, every time it hits a pebble or a crack or something, it keeps flowing. And we as individuals can do that same thing when we have that same mindset. That's one way certainly to get unstuck. And I talk a lot about confidence, and another piece is just knowing none of us can predict the future. So the more we wait to collect every single piece of information we need to make a step forward, the harder that step forward is going to be. Whereas if we just say, okay, I've got enough, I'm going to rely on what my head and my heart are telling me, and we take that first step, that is an integral part of building confidence, because most people think confidence is built at the finish line of something, and it's reinforced at that time, sure. But that very first step you take is a foundational building block, and that's going to help you take your next one and your next one. So whatever support you need to help you take that first step is so important, because just like water, you have a way too. And the second you can start that flow and create that momentum, you're going to have the wind at your back, and it's going to help you continue to move forward.
I love your analogy about the water. When it faces resistance, it just kind of turns, right? Or it figures out the path of least resistance on how it can move forward. Yeah. You also mentioned this, no one can predict the future. And one of my other interviews talked about her boss said to her at one time, I think you think I have a secret playbook that I haven't shared with you, and that I have all the answers. She said, I trust that you've done your research. I trust that you've thought about this, you've talked to the right people. And so therefore I trust you, go do. And that was really pivotal for her, because she was like, she didn't realize that's what she was doing, that she thought there was a secret playbook, but having it articulated really kind of, it just brought that to light for her. And when she shared that with me, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was an aha for me too. That I just thought my leaders had more information, they knew more, they should be, they could make those decisions. But many times it was just, they were more confident and they were more willing to take the risk, and they'd been there enough times that they knew that, some of it was not risk taking and some of it was. So,
and the reason that they had been there a number of times before is because they had taken that step.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They had a lot of opportunities too to be at a point of indecision, right? And say, well, I'm either going to stay here or I'm going to go left, I'm going to go right, I'm going to go straight, I'm going to do something. But that staying there doesn't build the confidence. It doesn't give you that track record. It doesn't allow you to navigate future risks because you now have more information and more of a track record. So taking that step is so important. Annie Duke is a professional poker player, a woman in a male-dominated industry, and she wrote a book called Thinking in Bets. And there was something in there she said that I thought was just so poignant. And she said, every decision that we make has an element of risk. Like when you're playing poker or when it's real life, like none of us know what's behind those cards. But until we order it up, we don't find out. And when we find out, we learn something either way. We continue to move forward. And, life is a lot like that. We don't know what's going to happen next, but, as intelligent human beings and, in your place of business, you got hired because you beat out other candidates. You had qualities and hard skills that they recognized for being valuable to the company. So just like that gentleman said about he doesn't have a secret playbook, like just they trust you. So knowing that, use that to say, okay, I'm going to move forward and make the decision and fail forward if you have to, but gauge your results so you can adjust and revise if necessary, but take the step.
Yeah. Well, and one of my life lessons would be being in decision and being not in action is probably the most uncomfortable place to be. You're just spinning, you're in your head, you're not moving forward. But as soon as you make a decision, you start moving forward, and then the momentum starts, and then you course correct. And next thing you know, you're like, I remember asking someone one time we were at a happy hour, and what I asked was, have you ever made a bad decision? And because the conversation was around, oh, and then I changed jobs, I did this, I did that, and then now I'm here, and it really worked out for the best. And I'm like, oh, so therefore, do you feel like you made a bad decision on any? And they were like, no. When you look back, a lot of times there aren't any bad decisions. There was just a lot of learning. And oh, by the way, it got me to this, they got me to this, they got me to today, which is kind of why I'm doing this podcast, even, is to help people who are just starting out, that they think they have to have it figured out. They have to know exactly what they need. And, and parents and friends and all put that pressure on young people, right? Well, what are you going to do? What are you going to be? What are you going to study? And how do you know, right? How do you really know? And
so I like the phrase rejection is redirection. Rejection is redirection. And then, a fun fact about the word decide itself is, this is going to sound morbid for a second, but it comes from the root word side, CIDE, which means to kill. And so when you decide, you're killing off other options and moving forward with one, with whatever amount of knowledge you have at the time. And I mean, I could say I have made some bad decisions in life in hindsight. However, they haven't all been good. However, I can look back on them and see some of the factors that were at play and learn from that, so that, a different time, it'll be a better decision. But it does get you to where you are, and you have to take that step and, kill off the other options and just say, I'm committed. And, it's similar to a goal. Like once you commit or once you have a goal, it's a beacon, and it's almost like this magnetic force that draws you to it, but you have to name it in order for it to create that pull. But when you name it, that's powerful. Naming it is claiming it, it's owning it. And that's another way to help move forward. It's just, okay, I'm going to decide, I'm going to commit, and we're going to see what happens and course correct, as you said, or navigate a different way. I also like to think of it like tacking, in a sailboat. It's much different than driving a car. Like, you can drive a car from A to B straight line, right? And a sailboat, you know where you start and you know your destination, but it's not a straight line. You're tacking based on how the wind is blowing, because there's a small handful of things that we can control. There's a bigger handful of things that we can't control. But as long as we're navigating with those things, we can still hit our destination. It just might be a different path than what we thought it would be originally.
Yeah, because the wind could stop, the wind could shift, the water could rot. I mean, there's a whole bunch of factors that you have to take into consideration. So this point of time, this decision right here, right now is all you can really control. And then, okay, now 2 minutes from now, we might have to change that again
Yeah.
because we need to deal with the new conditions.
New conditions.
So,
Yep.
so you were in automotive then for how long? And then did you shift to another industry before your entrepreneurial stint, or?
So it was like 10 years to the day that I was with automotive. And one of the things when I was in the automotive industry that stood out for me was I would watch these guys give presentations about the automotive industry, and they were not super polished with their presentation. Like half of their shirt would be untucked. They might be using double negatives. There'd be a typo in their PowerPoint, but they had this passion for what they were talking about. And that enthusiasm was so contagious and it was so authentic. And while I did have the polished presentation, I did not have an authentic passion for the industry. And I tried for a while, but I just never quite got there. And so part of the impetus for grad school was, okay, I want both of these things. I want the well done PowerPoint along with that enthusiasm, because what a powerful combination will that be? And then my authenticity can really shine forth. And authenticity plus action is that's a huge confidence booster as well. And so I started, but I didn't know what that thing was. So I started paying attention to articles that I was just reading for fun, or things that I would click on, just when I had time to kind of search around on the internet. Or, I attended some really random networking events where there was just a variety of people. And I just noticed trends over time of the people, the conversations, the articles that were attracting me. And it had a lot to do with renewable energy and sustainability and clean tech. And in order to jump industries like that, that's not typically just you throw out a resume and boom, here's your job. There's a lot of networking that's involved, and I needed to learn a new language. I didn't even know the jargon. So there was a clean tech group that I joined, and it met, I think, like the third Wednesday of the month. And the first time I went, I was like, writing copious notes and acronyms, and then looking them up outside of the time that I spent there. And I also had a goal of 5 business cards. Every time I went, I would get 5 business cards, and I would follow up with those people and say, hey, I'm new, I'm learning. Could we meet for coffee? Now in a virtual environment, the equivalent would be, can I set up a Zoom call, or, can we do a walk and talk where we're both on the phone and we're walking in our respective locations? So, you can still add that element to it. And I learned, and I remember how satisfying it was the day, that Wednesday night that I was there numerous months in, and I wasn't taking nearly as many notes, not because I wasn't interested, but because I knew the acronyms and I knew what they were talking about. And, just a year before I hadn't. And then that was really helpful as I started interviewing, that even though I didn't have the specific industry experience, I could speak intelligently to the industry. And so that's how the gap was bridged there.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that in so much detail about how you did that with the 5 business cards and joining the groups. I spoke at this networking group that was for folks in transition and job search. And one of the questions was, do I need more education? Should I pursue more education? How do I go about that? And my answer is, well, yes, because partly if you're in transition, you need to be in action doing something, right? And so if you're learning and growing because you found a new industry and something, that's part of it. That can really change your mindset and change your energy around your situation. In this case, it's building your confidence. And then when you do say, this is the industry I want to get into, and I have all these transferable skills, I just don't have all the expertise yet, but you can see how much I've already learned just in the short time I've been, learning on my own. Wow.
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
And then you set a goal for networking too, which was the 5 business cards, and which does sometimes you got to kind of push yourself, right, to be a little bit more out there than maybe how you want to be.
Well, and even as an extrovert, there were times that I've, it's been a long day at work, right? And there's a variety of things I could be doing at 5 o'clock or at 5:30. But building your network takes some strategy and takes some effort. And I remember sitting in my car and going, okay, I just 5 business cards. And one of two things would happen, Kathy. Either I would get the 5 business cards and, like be over myself and be like, okay, and, go on to get 5 more. Or I, if it was just that night where it was like, okay, well, I got my 5 and now I can go. And it just, it depends on your day. Like, again, those factors that you can't really control, but that was the goal that I set for myself. I know somebody else who, it was 3 for her. Another little game that I played was I would scan the room and say, who is the most intimidating person here? Like, who do I see that just visually is intimidating the heck out of me? And then my goal was, okay, that's who I have to go talk to. I have to introduce myself. And sometimes it was wildly successful, and other times it was a crash and burn. Like, they just, completely blew me off or didn't engage in the conversation. But you know what? It's not like they went home to their spouse that night and, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe this young woman who Jamie tried to introduce herself to me. No, like it was not even a blip on their radar screen, right? So you just keep moving along, because the reward and the opportunity in connecting with someone who your authenticity and their authenticity have that energetic connection, there's so much opportunity, and there's so many cool things that can happen in that. And that the magnitude of that reward is far greater than the magnitude of the risk or the awkwardness that you might feel when somebody doesn't reciprocate that way.
Yeah. I'm going back to your risk meter and that 3.54. I'm gonna have to bump you up. I got to bump you up on that.
See, it's all mindset though, right? Because I'm thinking about it like, what else can I do? How can I bridge that gap even more? So it just, it's a very individual scale.
Yeah, interesting. So it's funny. One of the things that got me over, some of that networking awkwardness is I typically look for someone else who's by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Or
That's
I
a great
position myself in a way where people are like by the food table or by the bar, where people are coming up, and then you can naturally start a conversation. And then, next thing you know, now people are coming over to your group and you've had this whole thing going on. So yeah, it can really, it's that mentality or mindset, like you said. If I put myself more as a host, even though I didn't put the event on, but how can I make other people feel more comfortable? Then they remember that. They're going to know that they might leave going, oh, I met this one woman, and they don't really even know what I said probably, but that that feeling, kind of like people don't remember what you say, but how you make them feel.
Definitely.
Made them feel comfortable.
I know one of the best icebreaker questions, especially for introverts at an event, is just to walk up to somebody and say, I feel so awkward at these events.
And usually the other person says, me too. And then
you'll make a fast friendship. Another tip on that is, speaking of acting like the host, is either an in-person or a virtual event. If it's in person, you can always go to the host and introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm here because I would like to meet somebody who does this, or I'm curious about that. Could you recommend someone, or point somebody out in the crowd to talk to? And then that bridges that gap, because you can say, oh, the host Joanna said we should connect. Great. There's your icebreaker. There's your connector. In a virtual environment, what you can do is reach out to the host in advance of the event and say, I'm attending, same thing, same premise. I'm attending for this reason. Do you know of anybody who might be there that I could talk to you about this industry or about advancing my career, or, whatever your goal is? And then when you find that name, you can watch for that person, either in the Zoom room, or most of the platforms have a list of participants, and you can find that person and message them through whatever the virtual platform is, and just say, hey, Christina, Joanna mentioned your name as somebody I should meet. Could we connect outside of this event? And there's a few extra steps there, and it takes a little bit of effort, but you're really setting yourself apart, because very few people are doing that. And in my coaching program especially, I talk about building your MAC team. MAC is an acronym for Mentors, Allies, and Champions, and they're absolutely critical for career success for both men and women, and especially for women who want to repair that broken rung of the corporate ladder and move up to director or move up to VP. And so, keeping your networking pipeline active even in a virtual environment is really critical. So you don't have this big gap when we do go back to work or have a hybrid situation or whatever the case may be, that you're not starting from scratch. You've been planting some seeds and cultivating relationships along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that whole, you don't need your network till you need your network. And then you feel really awkward
Yeah.
trying to build a network when you don't have a network. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very sad place to be. But if you're doing it all along and it's just part of who you are, and I found the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. I mean, it's when you don't put yourself in those situations regularly that they feel so intimidating. But if you're doing it all the time, it's like, wow, I'm walking into a room all the time with people I don't know, or I'm Zooming, I guess now. I'll have to redevelop my muscle when we start doing stuff back in person to get used to that walking into a room thing. So,
well, and just remind, in those circumstances, remind yourself that the best thing that can happen versus the worst thing that can happen, the magnitudes of those two are very different. The best thing is quite special, and the worst thing is like probably not that bad. So it's definitely it's probably not. I mean, and this is, I'll be happy to have a pep talk and a conversation with anybody going into this. We ran a series actually not too long ago about it. We called it For Your Network to Work Your Network, and happy to help anybody in their journey, because this is a really critical piece, and it's actually quite fun because you see success fast, and that success is going to help propel you forward even more, and it's a really rewarding journey, and again, critical to career success.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, gosh, I gotta tell you, I love how you think. I love how you break things down and then you can communicate it in a way that makes it feel so less intimidating and scary. So I can see why when you were speaking out on the circuit or were people asking you to speak, that they'd be like, I want more of that, or where's your book? Or how do I get in touch with you? Because if you're experiencing any of this, sometimes it's just one little thing can unlock you. And like you said, and the next thing you know, your career's taking off.
Yeah, and it's back to that curiosity piece, and that I get really frustrated with contention and unhealthy competition. I don't see much, or cattiness. Like I don't see times that has worked in anyone's favor. Whereas the collaboration piece is far more productive, and we are stronger together. And when we lift each other up, everybody wins. And it's interesting because that's a big piece of the foundation of confidence, is that when you're centered in your confidence, you have absolutely no trouble collaborating with somebody. And that's a little gut check that you can do for yourself, because if you find that you're criticizing more than you're complimenting, that's likely an insecurity somewhere in there. And I would just invite anybody who's feeling that to take a look at that, because that's going to make things so much harder for you. Whereas if you can address that insecurity and do some work on it, and I know we're almost at the end of our time here, but I'm opening up a whole big can of worms with this. But just at a minimum, if you can reflect a little bit on that, that's going to be hugely awakening for you, and that could really be a game changer when you address that, or you find somebody to talk to where you can say, hey, this is one of my weaknesses. Will you help me work on this, or will you just help me recognize it? Or how do I show up when this is happening? Because the personal growth that you're going to experience within that is huge, and that has a direct transfer to your professional growth. And that's the difference between a leader who has the I don't like the term soft skills, I call them strong skills, but the leader who has the strong skills versus the one who doesn't. It's a huge difference.
Yeah. And you see it, you're just like, wow, it's just, it's amazing how they can do that. And yet you still see them as powerful and decisive and all these other things, yet they are being vulnerable or asking for help or collaborating and being so authentic. So yeah, great stuff. Great stuff. Well, Jamie, you're right. We do need to start wrapping up. But you really, I think this is going to be great insight, especially for people I think that are feeling stuck or maybe in transition. And sometimes in those two scenarios, you're not the most confident that you want to be, because sometimes you're a little shook maybe about if it's not happening as fast as you want, or you don't know where you want to go next. I guess it can also be for people starting out, if you don't know where you want to go, you don't have that confidence on what you can bring. So I think you're giving some great insight today. So along those lines, looking for more insight here, what do you think has served you best as you look back on your career? And again, it could be a personality trait, a discipline, a habit, or strength.
One is definitely being intentional about surrounding myself with the right people. Again, referring back to that MAC team, being intentional about building mentors, allies, and champions. And another one is the gut check that anytime I was in a meeting or at a conference or circumstances where I had something to say and I was intimidated to say it, but I could feel it in my stomach. I had the butterflies or my heart was pounding. That was like like, do I have to, it's like the almost like the angel devil on my shoulders, right? Like, do I have to say this? Yes, you have to say this. What's the risk? What's the reward? This battle. And I'll tell you, one of my little tricks is that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a huge shiro, a sheepless hero, and inspiration to me. And this was, when she was still alive, but she's still able to do this for me. I would picture Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I'm like an inch taller than RBG. So even with RBG looking up at me and saying, "What's it going to be, Jamie? Are you going to speak up or not?" And I go, "Darn it, RBG! Yes, I will do this. I will do this for you. I will do this for me." And while it was scary, and there were times when my voice was shaking, and I felt like you could probably see my heart pounding out, like through my shirt even, I was so glad that I did that. So that would be just that hopefully words of wisdom, that when you feel those butterflies and when you have that same sense of, oh gosh, I should do this, but I'm scared, use that as your catalyst, that this is when you must do it, because you are going to, like, I've got goosebumps talking about it right now. You're going to be so excited on the other side, and that's going to encourage you to do it again the next time. And the reward is well worth the risk.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you. I love that. And I think this is such a great way to wrap up. You've really covered so much about self-awareness and what are those triggers that either hold you back or propel you forward. And how do you find those things to help propel you? I love your RBG. I love that. I think a lot of people might take that and go, oh, that's what I need. Is I do have that too. I have a boss in my head. Sometimes I'm like, well, what would she do? And I'm like, oh, she would go for it, or she would do this, or she would, I'm like, okay, sometimes you just need that little nudge. So,
yep.
Well,
we
Jamie,
got it in us. It's just, how do you channel it?
It's
everybody.
Well, thank you so much. And Jamie, again, I could probably talk to you all afternoon, obviously, but we do have to wrap up. And I do like to keep it to a certain time frame so folks can get all the way through them. So listeners, if you enjoyed today's interview, please subscribe below so that you can be alerted as other interviews are published. And if you have any questions for me or for Jamie, please note that on my website, lifestorycurator.com. As you know, this is where I'll post the interview for today, but I'll also post her social media, her book cover, etc., so that you can see more about her work and find her website and be able to get in touch with her. Because obviously after today, I think you're all going to want a little bit more of Jamie. So thank you, Jamie. And on that note, I will say stay safe, stay well, and let's keep sharing those stories. Thank you.
Awesome. Have an empowered day.